Okay. Everybody else is ready. Excellent. In complete opposition to the hippies movement, peace and harmony is not, in political circumstances, a beneficial thing. Really, the exact opposite is true. Political unrest, overthrowing an oppressive or harmful government, is beneficial for society, accountability, and really the people's human rights or generic interest. As the government team, we support the resolution as being true that it's about time for political unrest. The basic resolutional interpretation of the government is unrest right now in the Middle East. Multiple nations, we see Libya, Egypt, Saudi Arabia even. It's good for the people, the population of that nation in many ways through increasing accountability of the government, increasing the economic situation, or removing economic hardship of the countries. Multiple ways we'll be looking at a little bit later. Basically, one quick thing I want to define or clarify is the term "it's about time." It's about time meaning right now, it's happening, and it's a good thing. Not necessarily we need to create more political unrest, but right now the political unrest that's happening in several Middle Eastern nations is actually a good thing. It's worthy of support, recognition, acknowledging that it's happening and it's having good effects. There's three justifications I want to look at for political unrest actually being beneficial. Justification one is democracy. Democracy meaning improvement of democracy through overthrowing the government of political unrest. Point A is political unrest disrupts the normal flow of the government of the nation. Now, disrupting the norm of things is not necessarily always a good thing, but right now as we see economic hardship, monarchies, oppressive governments, disrupting that normal flow, that being the normal flow of things in the government, is something beneficial. Point B we see in Egypt.
Point of information.
Am I in my minute? Yes, you are. Okay.
Okay.
Do I have to stop the timer when she asks questions?
No.
Okay.
Okay. Towards point one, the democracy. Does the overthrowing of an oppressive government always lead to democracy?
Not necessarily always.
Thank
Sure. Point B in Egypt, Mubarak was the dictator for 30 years. The people want to vote in new leaders. I'm going to skip down to point C really quickly. Temporary good for beneficial harm, or temporary harm for the greater good. Basically, say disrupting the normal flow of government may be a temporary harm. It may disrupt the normal flow and cause hardships in the short term. But in the greater scheme of things, we see if we throw off an oppressive government, if we disrupt something that's harming the economic situation of a country, that's stifling accountability, that's fostering corruption, those temporary harms of removing a somewhat stable government to achieve the greater long-term benefit of a successful, firm government that is experiencing temporary harm for a long-term benefit. We see this through the example of Libya. Through a temporary crackdown or overthrow of its government, Libya will get its own accountable, its own responsible government that has the nation's best interest in mind. But point D is that the voices of the people are heard. Democracy essentially the essence of democracy is that the voices of the people will be heard, understood, and valued. And when the political unrest, which throws off an oppressive government, the voices of the people will be heard by definition of a democratic government because their opinions will matter. The government will be set up with the specific purpose of hearing and understanding the voices of the people. Now, justification two.
Information?
Sure.
Are you talking about a republic democracy or just democracy in general?
A democracy, specifically democracy. Yes.
Just democracy?
Yeah, democracy.
Right.
Justification two is social benefit. This one's rather quick with one point of Saudi Arabia. We see Saudi Arabia does not necessarily have a situation of violent or peaceful protests against the government itself, merely the threat of political unrest happening in the nation of Saudi Arabia through other revolts in Egypt and Libya and other Middle Eastern countries. Saudi Arabia has reformed and changed and improved the economic situation and the governmental accountability. Hold on. Saudi Arabia itself has changed simply because of the threat of political unrest for other countries. Go ahead.
Just want to make sure it was just a threat of political
Exactly,
unrest.
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Point one is in Saudi Arabia, the GDP growth grew. It was fostered by over 2.5% simply because of the number or the amount of funds and economic investment the government made in the nation because of the threat of political unrest. Point two under Saudi Arabia is that of accountability and joblessness, all economic harm. Political corruption, accountability of the government, and the economic situation were improved because of the threat of political corruption. And point C under Saudi Arabia justification 2. Really, we see here that political unrest in and of itself is good, but in addition to that, even the threat of political unrest, even the possibility of the government being overthrown, the politicians want to stay in power, and the motivation of political unrest makes them change what they're doing if they want to stay in power, because they realize the population is not happy with the way things are going right now. The threat of political unrest, the examples that other nations surrounding them are setting, or the example the populations are setting, it forces other countries' government to change because they don't want to experience this political unrest. Justification 3 is the Islamist dilemma. I'm going to see if I can explain this in the last minute and 45 seconds that I have. Basically, right now, the United States government has a seemingly contradictory or hypocritical stance on supporting governments. We support certain democracies around the world, and we are a big champion of democracy, but at the same time, we support certain monarchies and even oppressive regimes in other nations around the world. Political unrest, which is point B. Point A is we have a hypocritical policy. Point B is political unrest forces us to choose. It forces us to make a decision in our own minds, in our government minds. Do we really support democracy, or do we support monarchies and other types of oppressive regimes, which can become oppressive? Political unrest forces us to decide, really, do we want a democracy, which in many cases certain cases democracy have elected oppressive regimes, or do we want to support monarchies or other certain types of governments which are not democracies, not democratic? The final point C, is political unrest. This loses essentially the hypocritical stance of the government. It makes us choose one or the other. Right now we're trying to choose both, but political unrest forces us to step back and look at the situation for a moment and decide, really, what are we going to choose? What are we going to decide to support, democracy or monarchies and other types of regimes? So really, the hippies did not have it right. Peace and love and harmony necessarily does not, in certain situations, bring good things. But really, political unrest, and even as we saw in the case of Saudi Arabia, the threat of political unrest forces the government to change the course that it's on, make social reforms, create a more accountable government, improve the economic situation of a nation, and overall brings prosperity to a territory. Thank you.